Hello, friends. My name is Leigh Rondon-Davis. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am the Associate Artistic Director here at Shotgun Players. Before we get started, I want to offer our land acknowledgement, which is a practice we do here at Shotgun before all of our meetings and events. So if you'll take a moment with me, in the spirit of humility and respect, we request that you join us in acknowledging that the land beneath Shotgun's theaters and studios and throughout the East Bay is Ho-lland, the traditional unceded land of the Confederated villages of Leigh-Rondon, home of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. This land was taken by force by Spanish, Mexican, and US armies and militia. And because we make theater that calls us to re-examine our lives and the world around us, we believe it's important to acknowledge this truth so everyone who lives here can think about what it means to benefit from this legacy. And since we are all joining this meeting from disparate places, we invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the unceded land from which you're calling in. And if you don't know already, you can find out the land you're occupying by going to this link, native-land.ca, and we are honored to be in partnership with the organization Segura Te. This work, Segura Te, is led by the urban Indigenous women, and they support Native communities who still live on this land. You can make a voluntary donation to their land tax, the Shumi land tax, via their website. Another link in the chat, segurate-landtrust.org. And if you're located in San Francisco or on the peninsula, you can contribute to the recently created Unikin land tax supporting the Ramaytush Ohlone community. And here is that link as well. Well, wonderful. So without any further ado, Deneen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, hi. My name is Deneen Reynolds-Knott. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the writer of Babes in Ho-lland, and I am zooming from the unceded land of the Cherokee, the Canarsie and Lenape people. It's like, woo! Otherwise known as Brooklyn, New York.
And I see Miss Monica in the chat here. Thank you for tuning in from a Ramaytush Ohlone land in San Francisco. It's good to see you kind of in this space. Well, we're super excited to have Deneen on this installment of Let's Talk About Theater. I should have mentioned this before, but I am honored and beyond thrilled to be directing the upcoming workshop production of Babes in Ho-lland this December and January. And for like a little bit of context, I read Babes as one of the literary council members for the Bay Area Playwrights Foundation for their Bay Area Playwrights Festival. And it was one of the first plays I read, and I was like, I love this play. I will die for this play. And I got to like support it and champion it all the way through to the festival, when then I was asked to be the dramaturg on the festival production, where Deneen and I met and got to work closely together. So it's just been like a long, loving journey with this play and you, and I'm so excited it gets to kind of culminate in a production this winter. Yeah.
I know, I'm excited as well, and I think it was such an experience last summer, the summer of 2020, of course, that we were all just on Zoom and working and rehearsing together, and it was a lot of fun in many ways and so unpredictable, but we had a great time. So I'm so glad. It's such a wonderful treat to be able to work with you again, Leigh. So I'm really excited.
Same. I love this play so much. So I'm excited to dig in and talk about it more, and then ultimately have audiences come see it in the Bay Area this fall. Wild, or this winter. And I'll say, I see a couple folks joined us. So if you're watching today live, we really invite you to participate. You can drop questions, quotes, comments in the chat. Any questions that y'all drop in there, I will be lifting them up at the end of the conversation for a little bit of audience Q&A time. So as we're talking, if things occur to you or you want to know things about either Deneen or myself or the play, feel free to drop them in and we'll be sure to lift them up when we get to that section. But let's dive in. I know Deneen and I have been talking about this play at length for over a year now, but for our audiences watching, what inspired Babes in Ho-lland?
So at the time when I was thinking about writing the play, a young member of my family was starting a college search. And they were also thinking about gender, sexuality, and sort of their place in that. And it was, in a lot of ways, a love letter to them. And I was thinking, of course, about my own experiences in college in the 90s and thinking about how things have changed and how things haven't, and thinking about my friends of mine who graduated with me or didn't graduate with me. And so I was just thinking about that experience as a whole. And I think there's something so specific about on-campus life as a freshman, that when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, it's so heavy. There's so much heaviness that can be there. I mean, it can be really fun, but there are so many things that can be quite scary or overwhelming, or, we are asking 18-year-olds to handle things that maybe they are not prepared to yet. But I think that's part of the journey, is that preparation and that learning, that discovery. And so I was really interested in exploring that specific period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I had mentioned this to you, but every time I read the play, I had flash back to this memory of me waiting in the health services office, waiting to be matched with a counselor, to a therapist to talk to. And I remember doing all this research online and waiting so that I could get the one woman of color that happened to be in the department that semester. Ultimately, they hired more women of color, but I remember I was waiting specifically for her, and she was my saving grace throughout my time at Wellesley. I would just, have my appointments with her. And I remember just the psychiatrist was an older white man, and I did not like him. And I remember that wait just to have her, and all the things that she sort of helped me and guided me through in that the 3 years I was there. And so I think
big news, I mean, I think it's when because Babes in Ho-lland takes place on a predominantly white campus, and so for Black students on a campus, any Black staff member or Black faculty member is big news.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, did you hear in this office there's a Black person who's working in the registrar's office?
Yeah.
Run. So I think that was a big part of the experience.
Yeah, I remember our in the quad that I lived in, our resident director was a Black woman, and I just remember a group of us never left her house. She had kids, and we were just there constantly whenever she had office hours, hanging out, and she would cook us food, and we get to hang out with her gorgeous babies, and that's the place we wanted to be. That's where we found sisterhood, in this predominantly white campus in Boston. So I think just the sort of things that Sierra and Taryn are going through in the course of the play are so relatable, particularly for young Black women going off to school. Even though the play is set in the 90s, we're seeing those things still happen. And now, when I went to college in 2010, and when kids are going to college now in 2020 and 21.
I remember when we worked on the play at Bay Area, and we had the fortunate experience of being able to talk to a counselor, a Black woman counselor in a predominantly white campus. And I mean, she was telling us like, oh yeah, there's so much that's familiar here. Not much has changed, honestly. And I remember we both were like, oh, like, we were so sad.
Oh no.
Like, it really hasn't.
I know.
So I mean, that was a really interesting conversation. And I think, you know, one thing that I really explore in the play is weather and the sunless period on campus, because I remember when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, the first winter there, the sun just didn't come out for a really long time. And an email, a campus-wide email went out encouraging us all to go to the counseling center if we're feeling sad. It was just like, hey, the sun hasn't been around for a while, you know, and sometimes that can be like sad for people. So if you're feeling that way, we have the counseling center. And so that was a really interesting email, and it got a lot of people talking. And I remember when I was in grad school, I received a similar email when I was in film school, because when we were in the second year of film studies, there was an email that went out that was like, hey, you know, second year, it's the year before your thesis period, and we know that might be hard, and you might have feelings of, you know, uncertainty, which is kind of funny because, like, well, that's why I'm here, right? To like make a plan and have some direction. Because you probably don't feel a lot of direction right now. So we have a great counseling center. So, yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. It's just wild. And going to school in Boston on the East Coast, I just remember those like blizzardy winters where you couldn't go anywhere, or you sliding down the ice trying to get to class. And it does, because it's like seasonal. The acronym is literally SAD, because it's like seasonal affective disorder or something like that. When you don't get access to vitamin D or sunshine, how it affects your mood. Yeah. Oh wow. Well, you know, hearing that inspiration is incredible, and I think that you've built a really beautiful world that is so clearly set in the 90s. And I think one of the way that I like most identified it was through this incredible soundtrack that is basically, I think, like a backbone or like a really strong support throughout this play, because it's the girls. There are three characters in the play, Sierra and Taryn, who meet and start a relationship, and then Sierra's roommate Kat, who's a young white woman. And they're playing music for each other. They're like, the romance is building under all of these great songs from the 90s. And so I think it's going to be a treat for audiences to kind of hear all these throwback jams, especially those of us that were like fully cognizant in the 90s, which I was not, but it's like, you know, 4 in 1996. But I'm really curious, like, how did you select the songs? Why was it important for this musical sort of undercurrent happening in the piece?
I really feel like music expresses an interesting cultural divide. And so I think the first image I ever had of the play was, you know, a young Black woman just rocking out in the middle of a dorm room. That was really the first image I had, because I think it's counter to what people may expect, but I think it happens a lot more than people think. So it's like, oh, no one's here, here's my time, I'm gonna rock out to Hole. You know. So I think that was really the first image. And then it was interesting to me because so much about understanding like, oh, okay, what music, you know, some people are like, oh, where are you from? Where are you from? But sometimes when people meet and are trying to understand each other, it's like, what music do you like? Like, what's your favorite song? What's the first album you ever bought? What concert have you been to lately? Like, people really want to know, like, oh, what kind of music are you into? And so I was really interested in how that expressed. And I think the 90s is very particular because so many genres of music were popular and chart topping at the same time, which what isn't very, it's not, that's not a normal thing. It's kind of an outlier period of like 94 through like 97 where you had all these different genres that were all really popular. And so thinking about how that plays out on a college campus, and music taste as identity, really. Um, you know, I was interested in the ways in which Ciara, one of the characters, is expressing different parts of herself depending on what music she's listening to at the time, and what she enjoys listening to with her roommate Kat is very different from what she enjoys listening to with her, friend slash love, Taryn. So yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking a lot about that cultural, how we express culture and identity through music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just so like prevalent and real for me. And as a treat for those of you watching live right now, I'm dropping a link to the Spotify playlist that we made for the reading, featuring all of the songs featured in the show. So you get to hear it and see it first. But I still listen to this playlist like on my own time, like if I'm working or working out or washing dishes, because it goes literally, if you open the link, it goes from Whole to TLC to Babes in Toyland to Monica to Slater Kinney back to TLC. And so it's like all over the place, and it's so femme centric, but it's so like expansive. And like I remember being the kid that, listened to Black music, but I also really loved the like emo punk bands that were coming out in the late aughts, early teens, and like, it would be Fall Out Boy on one day and Jay-Z on another day. And I think that's how I let people know what I was about. And for me, playlist making is like, I can't journal. Like I'm terrible at journaling. I like writing down my feelings and thoughts. I can't do this. But in high school, my therapist was like, why don't you try making playlists to like capture how you feel? And so like to this day, I still make a playlist a month just about capturing all the music that I'm listening to at a time, or songs that are really speaking to what I'm feeling in the moment. And they're like, I can revisit them at any time. And so like this sort of serves as its own little time capsule journal for like who these characters are and what this time was musically and culturally, which I think is really fun.
It really is. That's very
good. So we've talked about the music, we've talked about the inspiration, and I think there's a really the fact that it's so specifically the 90s in this piece is really cool, because I think it gives a lot of folks, like younger folks, like I was an adult in the 90s, but like I know what it feels like going off to college, and the folks that were like, this is nostalgia all the way. Like I'm seeing myself, I'm hearing what my friends and I like to listen to and go do. And I have some thoughts about this as well, but I wanted you to speak to it first. But like, why do you think this play needs to happen now? Like, what makes it relevant now?
I don't know. I mean, I know why I needed to write it. I mean, I think for me, I wanted to write a love story. I wanted to write something that felt like an invitation to work on something joyful with other artists. And I think sometimes, I have pieces. My very first play was very intense in a lot of ways, and I felt like I also would like a break from that. My play, even right before I wrote this, had, I mean, I wouldn't call it necessarily super heavy, but I think Babes, the first draft of Babes I wrote in like 3 weeks. I just kind of had the image and I was like, okay, cool, I know what I'm doing with this play. And I think it was partly because the play I worked on before Babes was a very research heavy play. It took me a long time to write. I wrote that one more in like, I was writing that with the Liberation Theater Company residency. And I think that residency was about 10 months. And I feel like it took me about 10 months to write that play. And it was very long. The first draft was like 170 pages or something. Yeah, it's like 130 something now. It's shrinking, but with Babes, I just had the idea, and I just felt like, oh, it will be fun for me to write. It will be fun to work with people on, and I just think that has a lot of. I think that just has a lot of meaning, to just say like, what do I want to work on right now? What do I want to invite other people to work on with me? And what do I want to talk about? And what do I want to spend years sending out? And, I think we spend so much time with our plays, with workshops and readings. And so I thought it was just such a nice experience to write something about love and having love be the engine and coming together, and particularly about two young Black women in love, and having that be an engine to come together and create with people.
Yeah, I love that like intentionality behind it. Like I wanted to write a play that is joyful and that like folks can come together on and experience that love and joy in real time. And I think that's so powerful, and I wish more playwrights would do that.
It's funny because I think, I guess a lot of times it's like, oh, what do other people want? Or what would do other people want to see, or what are other people expecting from me? And I think I was just like in a very like me place. So just like, what do I want to work on? What do I want to invite? Because also I operate under the assumption like, this is wonderful. Like, I'm so excited that we're working on this, but I also operate under the assumption that I could write something and it's never produced, right? And so I might just be like in rooms around table work, working with people, but never necessarily taking it to the stage. And so what do I want to sit around and discuss? And what do I want to sit around and workshop? It kind of becomes like energetically, what do I feel like doing? Because I know that sometimes when things are more intense, I can feel it from the actors. I can feel that they're kind of exhausted, and I can feel, I can feel that energy in the room, and I don't necessarily automatically say, oh, that's good energy. I don't necessarily think it's bad energy, but I don't want that all the time. It's like some of my plays might have that energy, and okay, we'll muscle through it, but I don't want that all the time. I think it's nice. Even, it's not to say that there aren't potentially traumatic moments in Babes, but I think one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is to express trauma, to express sad times, because Black life in America has them, to express those moments without centering those moments. And so even though there are like tough things that happen in this play, I really didn't want to center them.
Yeah, well, I think so many things, so many amazing things. But like, I love the fact that you were like, this play I wrote for myself, for me. I am writing the thing that I want to feel and experience in theater, because I think that translates to like, you wrote a play for me in that, right? And you wrote a play for another Black sib or a young Black femme who like doesn't always see themselves represented on stage or represented in a more holistic way, right? And I talk all the time about, I love plays centering Black identity, but it's always hard, like what you were speaking to, when so many of them center trauma or Black pain or Black suffering. And I've always felt a distance for myself between those plays, because I was like, there are so many things I relate to and so many aspects of my own Black experience reflected in this play, but that wasn't all my Black experience was. My Black experience was joy and love and silliness and listening to music with my dad and then my friend Monday morning, like it was all of those things. And I think what you've done with Babes is really beautiful in that, like, it is a joyful experience. It is a play full of love, and it doesn't pretend that hard stuff doesn't happen to Black women. It doesn't pretend that hard stuff happens to young women and femmes in general. But it's not the like focus of this piece, and the focus is on who these characters are, who they become, and the love and care that blossoms between them. And I think that's special.
I think it's an interesting thing to think about that, because I understand the exploration of trauma and pain. I understand that, and I think it, as I said, I think it's so intrinsic to our experience as Black people in America. At the same time, I feel like sometimes I've been really interested recently in how there is the idea that somehow this expression of trauma or pain, because I hear what you're saying, that sometimes I'll go see a play that is a Black perspective, Black characters, and I'm sitting in the audience and then it ends and it's like, okay, I haven't learned anything new. I know what I know. This didn't tell me anything that I didn't know, but I also don't know if I feel anything. So I don't even know if this was really for me, which I hear from a lot of other Black artists, going to see, sometimes engaging with art and feeling like, oh, I don't really know if this was for me. It didn't feel like it was for me. And even sometimes when it's like, this is definitely for Black folks. And then Black folks go and they're like, really? I'm surprised, because I didn't really feel that way. It's like, I know everything that's expressed, but I also didn't feel like it was for me. So I think there is that connection. But I've been thinking a lot about, because I've listened to a lot of artists talking about the use of trauma and really thinking about it as a way of evoking empathy or provoking empathy. And I think that's really interesting, but I also think that perhaps empathy is being conflated with pity. And I think that pity is not a productive reaction. But I think that sometimes it's like, oh, if I present this really horrible story and someone, dies, or all this tragic stuff happens, people will feel bad, and it will promote this like empathy for, Black people in America. And I actually wonder, it's like, is it empathy or is it pity? Because pity often involves like a resentment, like, why can't you just get out of your circumstance, and remove a superiority, a remove. So I think that's really interesting, and I would love to hear more conversations about like empathy versus pity, because I do think sometimes they are conflated.
No, I think that's real. Or like, I call it theater for the benefit of white audiences. And not to say that like we don't all have things to learn about each other's experiences there's so much more we can do to tap into our like shared humanity and deeper empathy for all who walk the earth. But right. It's like what you said about like, I don't know if this was for me, like, right. I'm glad people are learning about this. Like the white woman next to me is sobbing right now. And like, she is obviously changed by this, but like, what is the catharsis? What is the healing that is involved for myself? And when is it actually not doing us justice or serving us as a Black community? Because it's one thing for people to like learn about the struggle of being Black in America, but I'm always questioning like what happens next. Like when someone walks out of the theater, are they going to look at young Black people differently, instead of clutching their purses or switching seats on the train or not sitting next to a young Black man? Like, what do we need to see to inspire change, or just a different way of considering the world or interacting with those around you? And I think some plays do that beautifully. And some plays I feel personally like, I don't know this quite hits the mark. And I think, there's like bringing it back to Babes, there's both a conversation about class and socioeconomic status and privilege in this play, even between the two Black women who are, kind of very similar. They're into the same things, they go to the same school, but they're both having very different undergrad college experiences due to the financial resources that their family has, or the access to privilege and finances and all of those things that their families have. And so like, I think Babes is really unique because it has me thinking about like the places in which I have privilege or don't have privilege, and how that connects me to other Black folks, and makes me also like feel very grateful for the privilege and opportunities that I do have, and look at others in a way like, okay, maybe that person hasn't had the same level of access. Does that make them any less than me, or any less deserving of opportunity or of chance, right? And so I think that's also like beautifully and in such a like nuanced, thoughtful fashion sort of addressed in the play and in the relationship between Ciara and Taryn too.
Right.
Yeah. Ooh, okay, we're getting some questions. Thank you, Monica. We'll bring those in just a couple of minutes. Oh, I love this question. I can't wait for us to get to this. I would love for us to talk about, we've been talking a lot about Ciara and Taryn, but I would also love to chat a little bit about Kat, Ciara's roommate, and the only white character in this play, the only other character we see in this play. And like, yeah, what inspired Kat, and what role does she play in this world, in this story?
Kat is really a composite of a few people I knew in my freshman year of college. And what I think is interesting about Kat is white and on this predominantly white campus, but doesn't necessarily see herself as part of the mainstream culture of the campus. She really is part of a subculture on campus, and also in like the city of Pittsburgh. Going to, rock concerts and listening to Riot Girl music and hanging out at the Beehive, which is a real place in Pittsburgh, where is like a very countercultural place to be. And I think, but she's also very much still learning, and I think how she sees herself, especially with being from like a small town in Pennsylvania, or a small city in Pennsylvania, that, not a lot of BIPOC folks at all, but probably feeling like, oh, well, my town is so white. I'm so excited to go somewhere where there are more, people of color. Oh, I have a Black roommate. How exciting, but still not necessarily like not knowing what she doesn't know, but also there's a lot of discovery there. And I think there's a lot of like, ooh, why did I think this? That's not cool. So I know that, I have a few people in mind when I think about Kat. And I think with all of them, there was always sort of that moment where it was like, wait, I don't understand. Why is there a Black entertainment television? And I was just like, okay, we're gonna have to have a discussion. Even though it's like, yes, I'm kind of in this countercultural thing, and I'm not like these other people here. But then there are still those conversations that would happen and were, really interesting. And I think that part of exploring Kat too was me exploring in hindsight what it must have been like for someone like Kat. And Kat is in a very intense relationship with an older guy on campus that is really all consuming. And I knew quite a few young women who were going through that same thing, And now looking, at the time, it's like, oh my God, all this over a guy? Are you kidding me? which is very funny because I feel like that's the reaction that people have to Kat, even as audience members. But I think one of the things is that Ciara is Kat's roommate. So Ciara is seeing a side of Kat that maybe Kat isn't even showing to other people. But also it's really intense to be, you're 18 years old, you go away from home, you're dating this older guy, you're going over his place and sleeping at his place, you're waking up at his place. Like, this is not something you've ever done before. So this opportunity to be in this really, really intense relationship, and really Kat's relationship, Kat's relationship is funny because, the fact that she goes over Neil's place all the time is why Ciara and Taryn are able to have the room to themselves. So there's a lot of things about Kat. They really have to hey, is Kat in the room or not in the room? And so a lot of what they're doing is sort of based on Kat's relationship status.
I feel like that's so relatable, even now, as me approaching my 30s, of oh no, it's your roommate over. That shared space dynamic, I think, will land with a lot of folks, particularly in the Bay, where a lot of us live with housemates and have to have housemates to survive and be able to live here.
Right.
Yeah, I love Kat as a character because I think I personally really identify with her and what you were saying about this, counterculture progressive person. And I'm sure Kat has this image of herself, I'm so open. I, want to know the world. I know the world. I get it all. Right. And then having that reality check of assuming, a Black student, all the Black students on campus get a Black student scholarship, right? Or need financial help. And that's very specific to Kat and sort of her understanding of the world and her roommate and the other Black students. But I've had those moments where I make those assumptions, or I, think a certain thing, and then I'm very surprised to find out it's different, and have to sit with sort of the embarrassment of not realizing it.
Right.
And I think especially in a place like the Bay Area, we celebrate ourselves as very liberal, very progressive, very open, but we still all have our biases and we still hold that those assumptions. And that's something every human does. And so I think someone like Kat makes us all cringe and be oh my God, I would never be like her. I can't be like her. Oh my God, am I like her?
And what's so funny is that Kat cringes about other people, all the time. And I feel like that was very consistent with my experience of young white women who were sort of more on this countercultural side, who were sort of still tripping up and then being really shocked and saying I remember one young woman said to me why do I think that, and was actually really angry about it, and was why, I feel like I've been taught this and it's not okay, this is not something I should have been taught and it's so wrong, so it's because it's not I'm not going to take accountability, whatever, I believe whatever I believe, we'll just agree to disagree. I think that Kat is taking things in, which is interesting. I was also really interested in this at the time, the way in which, especially with riot girl culture and, the way that white women were wearing anger or were really had, I don't want to say they had permission. They were just doing it.
But they felt empowered to really wear and embody and project that rage.
Projecting that anger. And I remember so specifically, young Black women's reactions to the young white women who were expressing anger in that way. And just the the discomfort and the like, what is happening there? And like, you know, it was it was a very interesting expression, but I do remember that a lot. And I think I explore that too, just thinking about, you know, who gets to like be profane in with their professors, and who gets to kind of wear that chip on their shoulder without being told that they have a chip on their shoulder or being called angry, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like, you know, there's so many systems of oppression that like justify that anger on behalf of so many demographics, but to also see the young women of the play sort of grapple with that, like the conversation they had, like, you cussed in a paper? What? And the two young Black women are like, we would never do something like that. We could never dream of doing something like that. And Kat's like, what? My teacher's really cool, whatever. And like them in that conversation, recognizing the differences of what it means to be a woman, but as a Black woman, or as Black women and as a white woman. And like it probably didn't like it when you read that scene or hear that scene, it doesn't feel like the girls immediately have that understanding or like fully understand what that's about. But we as audience members sitting in this day and age after the conversation that we're having, like see that, like, oh, wow, you know, young Black women spend a lot of their lives and upbringing being taught to like not be too loud, not be too angry, not be too, you know, whatever, so that we can just sort of assimilate and make it through, or not be labeled in these ways that were detrimental, both to like our emotional well-being, but also like in the ways that we were expected to sort of be, particularly at PWIs, representatives, like positive representatives of our race.
Right. Being able to like conduct yourself in those spaces, and what it means to do well, to succeed in those spaces. Definitely not consistent with profanity in a paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are all these just like little discoveries that each of the characters make sort of in relationship to one another. And, you know, there's some really cool conversations between Ciara and Taryn around like class, like not acknowledging the people in the dining hall or getting to know them. Like they serve you dinner every day and you don't take the time to get to know them, or to know their names. And you know,
right, because I think Ciara comes from a more, you know, she's a young Black woman who comes from a more suburban environment. Mm-hmm. And so there's just certain behaviors and kind of cultural things that she just doesn't realize, or just doesn't know. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting when, you know, on a PWI, when all these Black students come together and they're all coming from these very different places and very different, you know, cultural norms, really. Because, you know, we're not a monolith, of course. But I think sometimes it's assumed, and it's like, what's wrong with you? Like, don't you know that this is something that you do, or that you say hello, or, and not everyone does. And it's funny because I was just watching an art, like the book, The Other Black Girl. Mm. Oh, Leigh, you have to read this book.
Okay, I'm excited. I have not read it.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you. Oh, yes, it's Zakiya Dahlia Harris. And it's like this book about this young Black woman that works in publishing, and another young Black woman joins, and it's like an all-white publishing house, and another Black woman joins, and she's like, oh, goody, you know. Hopefully we're going to be like good friends, and it doesn't turn out that way. So, but the author was doing a talk recently, and she was talking about how she was in the bathroom, and there was in a bathroom in the publishing house, and this was like an inspirational moment because there was a young Black woman in the bathroom too, and she kind of looked over and was like hoping it would have a moment, and the other woman didn't look over and didn't say hi, didn't acknowledge her in any way. And she walked away from that really disturbed. And I thought that was so interesting because I also feel like, you know, we don't even give ourselves a break. We don't even give each other a break. She could have gotten like bad news that morning. She could have just come from the doctor and had a horrible time. She could have just, there's like so many things that could have happened, that she could have been in a bad place. Like, so I thought it was just interesting because I was like, oh my God, we can't even give each other a break, can we? Sometimes just like, this is like 2 minutes in a bathroom, come on.
Let her ride. Let her ride. We don't want to assume. We don't know her life.
Exactly.
But I love, like, in Babes is like they're learning these things and having these like hard moments, but also there's so much love and care like between them, and that they are supporting each other in sort of this growth. Taryn particularly around Ciara, who's, a year younger, who's a freshman. Taryn's a sophomore, she knows what she's doing now.
Right.
But they do, like, they offer each other wisdom and advice and other perspectives in such like a way that I hope we can take that from the play and like model that more in our interactions with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really enjoyed, writing those scenes when it seems like it's gonna be a moment when something's gonna go down, but it's like, oh no, like it's fine, like this is what it is, and we're just gonna keep on walking and and keep hanging out. But I think college can be like that. I think it's funny that sometimes in college people do give each other a lot of grace, and yeah, and then that grace runs out. But
yeah,
at some point it's like TikTok, no more.
No more.
Yeah.
Well, we are approaching towards the end of our conversation, and I wanted to lift up a comment from Karen. I saw the reading last year at BAPF. I loved it. The 90s music soundtrack escaped me. What stood out for me was the class difference and the heart connection that I could identify with. And yes, I too want to see Black representation in a human way without diluting the historical reality that still plays out today. Yeah, I think you got to come see the show, Karen. I think you're going to really enjoy it and have that experience without that dilution, I think, too. And then there was a question from Monica. And this came in sort of while we were talking about other Black plays and representations of Blackness on stage. And Monica asks, what is the responsibility of Black playwrights? Are there responsibilities inherent in what they do / should write? Yeah. Any thoughts about that?
When I hear responsibility, I think about obligation, and obligation makes me grumpy. I mean, I think, it's tough because in a lot of ways, I really want Black playwrights to write what they want to write. And I think, but I also think that we need to, it's always a valid question of like, well, why are you writing this? Why are you writing this? Or why do you feel like you need to write this? Or, what are you hoping to do? I think those questions should always be asked. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I really see, playwriting for me is very much an artistic expression. I write because it's a centering activity for me. When I'm not writing, everyone around me can tell. They're like, wow, you should really be writing.
I just imagine your sons being like, Mom, go write something, please.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, for me, that's what it is. And so I think, I mean, I have heard of playwrights kind of putting things away that they felt like, oh, I wish I hadn't written this, or I wish I hadn't ended up played this way, or I think this was more traumatic than I wanted it to be. And I think sometimes you write something and you don't really know until you start working with people on it. Sometimes you just really don't know. I think that's why theater is so interesting, because we come together as a community and then we start to work on it. And then once you're working on it with people, then you can kind of figure out like, oh, this is not what I intended. Because I think that a lot of times people are trying to express their own pain or explore their own pain or explore their own family stories. And then people get really, and then sometimes the excitement that builds, like I have a play that people get really excited about and they're like, this is so timely. And, you know, and I almost feel like timely is almost like a bat that they're hitting over my head in a way, because sometimes I feel like with Black plays, it's like, oh, be timely. It's like, you know, a Law and Order episode or something, like with the headlines kind of energy that's weird. And so I remember feeling like more and more like uncomfortable with having my play be like thrown into a category that I didn't really intend for it to be in, and be told, oh, it's timely, and you know, everyone wants to like put it in a reading. They're like, you know, Black Playwrights Festival reading or something. And you know, sometimes I'm like yes, and sometimes I'm like no. You know, and I think sometimes you know, we write these things, and sometimes they kind of have their evolution, and then we have to kind of figure out like, oh, do we want to put it out there or not? You know, do I want to work on this? Do I want to invite people to work on this with me? Maybe. Is there something I can find in it that feels more empowering for me, or you know, because I think sometimes we are expressing pain, we are expressing our trauma, but there is a reason why we're writing what we're writing. But I also think sometimes our trauma is way too exciting for white institutions. And I think that's the moment when you're just like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Y'all are just, you know, too happy about this play.
Yeah.
And that's when it's a little uncomfortable, a little bit like, ooh, I feel like this play is doing work that I didn't really intend for it to do. And then you have to like take a step back and think about it more. Yeah. It's a process. It's really a process.
Yeah. I mean, I don't write plays for other people to read, so I can't necessarily like speak on behalf of the playwrights, but like I think it's a really juicy question you asked, Monica, in that like similarly to Deneen, I feel like any playwright should be able to write about what they want to write about. But then the question is like, does this need to be produced? Who is this for? Why this play now are all really important questions in deciding. And I think institutions, like speaking as a producer, as a, you know, a staff member at Shotgun that is in the artistic decisions, it's like we need to give playwrights more agency, like to do this exploration and to ultimately say, you know what, this is not the story I want to put out in the world, or this is not the way I want this story to be contextualized, or even like stop making a monolith of our experiences, right? Like I'm writing about me, I'm writing about my family, I'm writing about this thing that I wanted to explore, and I am not consenting for this to be sort of a blanket statement about the Black experience or whichever demographic experience, right? And we have to give playwrights the room and that agency in order to do that. And like, I think we also as institutions really need to unpack the like pain and trauma for consumption and for entertainment, right? Like we need to be, as producers, really thoughtful about what we put on our stages and why, to what end. Because if we're doing that to, oh, we think, you know, our white audiences will learn something. I'm like, well, does that serve our Black community members? Does that serve the Black artists putting in labor and love into this work and who are potentially either being re-triggered or having to dig into things that are really personal and hard? And if we're thinking about like producing more plays that don't necessarily fall into that category, like what more could be gained by having a celebration of love or having a celebration of life, or capturing both the like the hardship and the beauty at the same time in an authentic, thoughtful way, and how much more impactful that work can be, I think is like a really exciting thing to think about for like where theater is going next.
Yeah, and I also think about like how how does our work function institutionally? Like I mentioned, sort of the Black Play Festival or something, where it's like, okay, they like these institutions will have a reading series and there'll be all these people of color, but then there's no playwrights of color in their season.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, something that I took out of this time of like introspection, I was really thinking a lot about what I wanted to do, not necessarily what I wanted theater what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think that I'm a lot more cognizant, like, oh, we want to like invite you for this play reading, and so we can like put your Black face all over our social media, and but our season will have no Black playwrights.
Mm-hmm.
And we just use the reading series to get our audiences more comfortable, but they've been doing that for like 10 years or something. So I feel like I just have to be like, I feel like just personally, I'm just a lot more aware of, if a theater is kind of just using the reading series to kind of as a kind of a marketing tool to be like, hey, we have some Black playwrights here, but it's just like the least investment they can possibly make.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to their actual seasons, there's just no BIPOC playwrights. Then I would know. So like, I feel like I'm at a point now where I can kind of say no thanks, and just say, because I also feel like that's where I'm so excited about working with you on Babes with Shotgun, and I'm really excited about, like, I'm going to Alabama soon because I have this outdoor piece that's going to be at Alabama Shakespeare Festival. And the one thing that I've learned about that is that going into production, first of all, I'm like, these are my first productions. I'm like, what? But I think I think there is something about being in that like reading series, vortex, that it's like, well, we aren't able to learn as much. We're not able to work with designers. We're not able to have the learnings to like to go forward. And so I'm really excited about having that opportunity. And I think it's really important that other playwrights have it too.
I love that. That's such a beautiful note to end us on. I think you'll have to come see the play to sort of see and experience all of this, but I'm going to drop a quick link in the chat for the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. Tickets aren't on sale yet, but if you're curious and checking out, there's a little more information about Deneen's play, Shoebox Picnic Roadside, Route 1. Thank you for that affirmation, Monica. It absolutely has been an incredible conversation. And Karen and Monica, thank you both so much for joining us. I want to just quickly shout out a couple of things happening at Shotgun. So our next Let's Talk About Theater is going to feature A Small Fire. So playwright Adam Bach and director Marianne Rogers. And that conversation will be facilitated by Patrick Dooley, our artistic director. We still have our 30/30 commissions rolling out. So they're commissions of original work inspired by past productions from Shotgun's 30-year history that envision a new world. And so you can head to our social media for highlights or check out all the available pieces on our YouTube channel. There's some really incredible stuff being made by predominantly local artists, but actually artists all across the globe, inspired by Shotgun's 30-year production history. So that's a great way to celebrate. Deneen, did you have anything else you wanted to plug? Anything folks can keep an eye out for?
Oh, well, I actually have an audio, sort of an audio sound walk that I'm working on with 3 other artists called Exits, and it's going to be available online in October. You can listen to it from like anywhere, but it's a sound walk through Fort Greene, Brooklyn.
Amazing. Well, once those links get live, send it our way and we'll make sure all of you get a chance to check it out. We'll put it in our newsletter and on social and just shout it out so folks can check out more of your work. Deneen, Thank you so, so much for joining me. I'm so excited to see you this winter when you come into town for the production.
I know, finally.
I know, right? We have not, in the like year that we've now known each other, we have not met in person. And so I'm so excited to like see you in the flesh.
It'll be really exciting. I'm really excited too. I was in touch with Jessica too. I'm like, I'm coming.
Yay! Oh my gosh, she's gonna be so excited to meet you. Well, thank you folks for tuning in. Thank you, Deneen, once again for this beautiful conversation. Huge thanks to Heather Kelly Laws, amazing stage manager and Shotgun Company member, holding it down on the back end. And with that, friends, good night, and we will see you very soon.